Thank you, Shmuley, Toby, Alex, for inviting me. Thank you, Harry and Scott, for welcoming me to appear with you. Great to be with you all tonight. Please indulge me for, I'm going to speak in Hebrew for 30 seconds.
חבר'ה, באתי לפגוש אתכם. אני צריך לדבר באנגלית, כי אף אחד לא יבין אותי אם אני לא אדבר באנגלית, אבל אם אני אומר משהו שלא ברור, בבקשה, פשוט תרימו את היד. אני פה בשבילכם. I'll consider it a success from my perspective if I leave about half of you thinking after this evening about the following question. Should there be Jews? Should there be Jews? Whether you're Jewish or not, should there be Jews? Is it a good thing that there are Jews in the world? And there's a reason that I think we have to ask that question today, because I think for the first time in 2,000 years, that's not an inevitability. In fact, I would say it's likely that we don't have Jews, certainly not in the way we're constituted today, 3 or 4 generations from now. I'm going to tell you the way I answered that question for myself originally in order to just get you thinking about this, at least the way I did. And my answer was wrong. And I think this was the wrong way to think about it. But it led me down, I think, a good path of questioning. So I grew up in what I would consider a typical American Jewish home. Typical in that my 3 older brothers all married non-Jewish women. And that's the numbers, right? It's about 75% of us do that. And I didn't consider that any kind of a tragedy or bad news or anything like that. I love my sisters-in-law. I love my nieces and nephews. They're fantastic. They're wonderful. They're not Jewish. That's okay. I don't see that as any sort of a tragedy on an individual level. And I know some people might feel differently about that. I don't. But I do see the numbers. The numbers are very clear. If we continue on this path, it's over. It's over, right? Well, my grandchildren's generation, at least in this country, we could talk about Israel, in this country, will be about 5% the size of my generation in this country, which is way below critical mass for self-sustenance, right? We won't, Jews won't be meeting Jews at a rate that will be able to sustain us. And I grew up with 0 Jewish exposure, 0. I fasted on Yom Kippur. That was the only thing I did. That was my entire Jewish life, was fasting on Yom Kippur. Why? I don't know why. That's what we did. I grew up in boarding school in New Hampshire without many Jews around me. I never really considered myself any different. I look a little bit different from most of the kids that I grew up with, but that was about it. I never felt different. I've never encountered anti-Semitism in my life. That just was not a factor. I was American. And I started getting into Judaism in high school, and it was a Calvinist minister actually who kind of got me into it as a curiosity, not really as a kind of a profound search for my identity. But I very quickly got sucked in, and there's a moment that I write about and speak about where I was shown for the first time the picture of the boy in the Warsaw Ghetto who's being arrested with his hands up. Many of you will recognize it. If you don't, I urge you to just Google boy in the Warsaw Ghetto. It's the first image that'll come up in Google Images, which is a photograph that struck me. And immediately I realized I was seeing it the wrong way. In that the way that photograph is framed, you see the boy in the left side of the picture. He must be 6 or 7 years old. The picture of innocence with his hands up, and the Nazi troops on the right side of the picture with their guns pointing at him. And that juxtaposition of kind of raw brutality with pure innocence is what that picture begs. I didn't see it. I knew I was supposed to see it, but I didn't at all. I couldn't muster hatred or even anger for the Nazis on the right. I didn't know Jewish history well, but I knew enough to understand that they were just playing a role that somebody's played in most generations in the last 2,000 years. Somebody has worn that the uniform changes, but it's the same role that's being played. In fact, I saw them primarily as victims, not victimizers. What did strike me in the picture, and again, I encourage you, even if you've seen it, Google it and look at it again, is standing behind the boy is his family and probably his neighbors. This is 1943 is the final liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto. These are the adults, and they're also, their faces and their body language project shock and resignation. And I was angry at them. And that was what that picture provoked me. I was furious. How could you not have had a contingency plan, right? And it could be in Lithuania. This happened to be in Poland. It's the same story everywhere. You're not Poles, you're Jews. This is your story. This is what happens. How could you not have had a plan B? Because this child, who is your charge, this is your primary responsibility. You know, you're his parents. It's to protect him physically. You've abrogated that. And as far as I know, everybody in that picture was dead in 2 or 3 weeks. That's probably exactly what happened to the people in that picture. It didn't take me long to think about, well, wait a second, what's my contingency plan? I've never thought of myself as anything but American. As far as I know, the people in that picture never thought of themselves as anything but Poles. I don't know. I'm closer in age at this point. I'm 16 or 17. I'm closer in age to the adults in the picture than I am to the boy. So who am I to be looking at this from the boy's perspective and be angry? What is my contingency plan? Which begs the next question, is America an aberration in Jewish history? Is this the end of Jewish history? Or is this just what it felt like at the ascendant phase of the Jewish cycle? And if you spoke to my grandfather, he would describe 1920s Germany more or less the way I felt in 1970s and 80s America. Totally welcome, totally part of the franchise, until we weren't. Now, I don't know the answer to that question in America. And if you put a gun to my head today, I'd say America is a special animal in Jewish history. I do think it takes a special society to welcome those people, to nurse your father back to health. I do think that that's the case, but I don't know. I don't think any of us knows for sure what's happening here. But that started a search for me where I had to understand who I am. I don't know exactly what Judaism means, what my role in it is, but I do know that there's a 3,500-year chain that my 3 older brothers broke. And if I'm going to break it, I don't want to do it accidentally. I want to do it as an informed decision. Okay, I don't need to carry this torch anymore. That search took me to Israel. I did a summer program in Israel, kind of like what Birthright is today, similar sort of like a teen tour of Israel. And I saw people who were not afraid to ask the question I had asked. Because when I asked my friends at Exeter, my Jewish friends, is America a special moment in Jewish history? Is this the exception? People looked at me like I was crazy. Why are you even getting into that? That's just not something we think about. I couldn't see my parents about that. Nobody really wanted to entertain that question. And in Israel, I saw people who not only had the courage to ask that question, they had the courage to answer it with their feet. Not in a dorm room in Exeter, New Hampshire, but on the ground in Israel, and had the dignity to fight and pay a very steep price for their freedom and their dignity. And that was the moment that summer where I realized what that picture meant to me. It was shame. It was shame in the indignity of our accepting our fate for 2,000 years. And Israel to me was the romantic dignity. I fell in love. Israel, that was my experience with Israel. And very quickly I started learning Hebrew, started learning Arabic, started getting into the kind of Middle East and understanding what this was all about. I took a junior year abroad in Israel and had the opportunity to actually live there and start feeling a little bit more confident in my Israeliness. At some point I had a kind of a moment of lucidity, of clarity and I understood that if I went back to school, I would probably end up, in law school or on Wall Street or doing something fine, something great, fantastic, but I have a dream, and if I don't seize it right now, it's not coming back. This is my moment. And occasionally life, I think, grants us these moments of lucidity, and it's a gift if you can recognize them. I probably have had many that I didn't recognize. This one I happened to recognize, and I grabbed it, and I became a citizen. I made Aliyah. Finished my university a few months later in Israel, and got my draft papers, and ended up through a comedy of mistakes, very strangely, in the Air Force at the academy in Israel, expecting to be invited to leave any day. The days went by, I was still around. A year went by, I was still around. 2 years went by. 4 years later, I was leading people into combat, flying F-16s in Israel. That was a very intense experience, and my Jewish exploration ironically ended the day I made Aliyah to Israel, because I didn't have time. I didn't have time. This was the most intense experience of my life, still to this day, was going through flight school in Israel and serving afterwards in the Air Force. No time for reading, thinking, Jewish thought, Jewish exploration, and I was a Jewish neophyte. And it was only about 10 years into that experience that I looked around and I realized, I don't know anything about Israel. Nothing. I don't know anything about Israel. Everybody I know is a kibbutznik from Kurs Tais, from flight school. That's it. It's a tiny, tiny cut of Israeli society. I don't know what it looks like to cross the street in Israel. I've never interacted with anybody from the Haredi community in Israel. Don't know anybody from the Haredi community. I don't know anything from most communities in Israel. And I don't know anything about Judaism. And yet, this was not the Peace Corps. This was not Teach for America. I had been in combat over 100 times. I had done things that I'm never going to be able to take back. Never. Some of them I regret. This is not something I could say, oh, you know what? That was a wrong turn. I'm going to go back to law school now. My hands were dirty already. I was in the kind of the old joke about ham and eggs, where the chicken is involved, that the pig is committed. I was committed, and I had to. And this was a crisis, really a crisis for me in my life. I had to figure out what this was about. I had made very, very personally consequential decisions in the name of Judaism, a concept that I knew still almost nothing about. And in a very kind of backward way, started retracing my steps to that moment, looking at the boy in the picture in the Warsaw Ghetto. And this book is really about that, is what does this mean? And what I want to leave you with, I'm going to end in a minute. My parents' generation didn't have to ask this question. They didn't have to ask this question. And, in the United States, where they were completely accepted and fine and had a wonderful, wonderful life here, they were Jewish. And if you were not Jewish, you looked at them as Jewish. One of the things that's kind of most interesting to me today is that the Jews have become white. When I was growing up, Jews were not white. We were ethnic. We were an ethnic group, right? That perception seems to have changed, meaning we've become embraced by wider society. And if you look at it, I think it might not have escaped many of your attention. The concept of diaspora, tfutzot, is over. It's over as a useful model for describing the physical architecture of Judaism in the world. It's not diaspora anymore. 90% of us are here and in Israel. That's where the Jews are. The two most philo-Semitic, right, the most Jew-loving jurisdictions in certainly hundreds of years, probably 2,000 years. Right? You can be completely American if you choose to be as a Jew in this country, and obviously you can do the same thing in Israel. So for the first time, the vast, vast majority of world Judaism can treat Judaism as an option for the first time in 2,000 years. And what I say is, and that's obviously much more pronounced in the United States, but I would posit that the reason Israelis marry other Jews is because they don't know anyone who's not Jewish. That's why they're marrying other Jews. It's not because Judaism means something special to them. Not for everybody, but I think for the majority of us in Israel. By the way, and that's pretty well borne out, because if you look at statistics for intermarriage among Israelis in the United States, they're about 90%, much higher than they are for born American Jews. And again, I'm going to come back on an individual level. I don't judge it. I think it's fine. Frankly, in my experience, love is pretty hard. If you find love, grab it. Don't look at it too closely, because it's very difficult to manage that. So on an individual level, I don't fault anybody for the choices they make in love. But the numbers are leading us to extinction. And if it's important, might not be, but if it's important to us that there be Jews in the world, there's a few decisions that we all have to make as individuals and as a community. I'll leave you with the good news, which is I don't think we've had more agency as Jews, not in 2,000 years, in 4,000 years. This is peak Jew right now. We have never had more power and more agency and more ability to steer our fate. Part of that has to do with the fact that we are now concentrated, again, in two jurisdictions. There's almost no Jew in the world who lives where he or she does not want to live today. That almost doesn't exist today. Think of that. That's an aberration from the last 2,000 years. You can go wherever you want. You have total freedom. We have unprecedented prosperity, unprecedented political leverage in the world. If there's a time to make a move, and really take our destiny into our hands, it's right now. But no one's going to impose that decision on us. That's something we're going to have to embrace ourselves. Thank you.